The bus lurched to a stop outside Fort Bennington's main gate, and Kira Thorne pressed her palm against the window, watching the armed guards check identification papers with methodical precision. 18 years old and exactly 5 feet 4 inches tall, she knew what everyone would see when she stepped off this bus. They would see a kid. They would see someone who looked like she should be heading to college orientation, not basic combat training. She adjusted the small duffel bag on her lap, the only possession she had brought with her. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, a photograph of her grandfather, and nothing else. No phone, no journal, no trinkets from home. She had learned long ago that carrying too much made you slower, made you vulnerable, made you someone who could be followed by the weight of things left behind. The driver cranked the door open with a hydraulic hiss. Kira stood, moving down the narrow aisle past 2 other recruits who had barely spoken during the 6-hour drive from the processing center. Both were men. Both looked like they had played football in high school. Both had spent the entire ride talking about how they were going to dominate every drill, every exercise, every challenge the Army could throw at them. Neither had asked her name. Her boots hit the asphalt, and the September heat wrapped around her like a fist. The sky stretched overhead, cloudless and brutal, the kind of blue that promised no mercy. Across the parking lot, a drill sergeant stood with his arms crossed, watching the handful of recruits stumble off the bus with their bags and their assumptions about what the next 4 months would hold. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed courage like this in your own community, or perhaps you know military families where you live. Kira moved toward the formation area where other recruits were already gathering, their voices carrying across the hot pavement. She counted 23 of them, mostly men. A few women clustered together on the far side like they had already decided safety existed in numbers. One of the women glanced at Kira, took in her slight frame and young face, then looked away without acknowledgement. The drill sergeant stepped forward, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. His name taped Red Holloway, and his eyes moved across the formation with the cold assessment of someone who had seen 1,000 recruits just like them and knew exactly how many would wash out before week 3. "This is Delta Company," he said. "For the next 16 weeks, you belong to me. You will eat when I tell you to eat. You will sleep when I tell you to sleep. You will breathe when I tell you to breathe. Some of you think you are ready for this. Some of you think you know what it means to be a soldier." His gaze landed on Kira, held there for 3 seconds, then moved on. "You are all wrong," Holloway continued. "You know nothing. You are nothing. We will break you down to your component parts and rebuild you into something useful. Most of you will succeed. Some of you will fail. A few of you should not be here at all." Kira kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady. She had heard variations of this speech before, different words but the same message. They wanted to see who would flinch, who would show fear, who would start looking for the exit before training even began. She did not flinch. To her left, one of the football players from the bus shifted his weight, and Kira could feel the attention turning toward her, could sense the assessment happening in the minds of the recruits around her. The girl who looked like somebody's little sister. The girl who probably got lost on her way to community college and ended up here by accident. The formation broke, and they were herded toward the barracks, a long concrete building with windows like vacant eyes. Inside, the air smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat, the particular scent of a place where thousands of people had passed through without leaving anything of themselves behind. Kira claimed a bunk in the corner, the one nobody wanted because it was closest to the latrine and farthest from the door. She preferred corners. She preferred positions where she could see everyone and everything, where her back was protected, where she controlled the angles. A woman approached, tall and broad-shouldered, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her name tape said Vickers. "You sure you are in the right place?" she asked, and her tone carried the weight of someone who had already decided the answer. Kira looked up from stowing her duffel under the bunk. "I'm sure," she said. Vickers laughed, a short bark of sound. "You look about 15. My little brother is bigger than you." Kira straightened, meeting Vickers' eyes directly. "I am 18, she said. "Same as most of us here." "Sure you are," Vickers said, walking away toward the cluster of women on the other side of the barracks. Kira heard her voice carrying back, heard the words tiny and mistake, and not going to last a week. The first night, they were given 45 minutes to shower, change into PT uniforms, and report for evening formation. Kira moved through the chaos of bodies and noise, finding her rhythm in the disorder. She had learned long ago how to be present without being noticed, how to move through spaces like water, touching nothing, disturbing nothing, leaving no trace of her passage. When formation was called, she stood in her assigned position, third row, fourth from the right. Holloway walked the ranks, his boots striking the pavement with metronomic precision. He stopped in front of Kira, looking down at her from his considerable height. "What is your name, recruit?" he asked. "Thorne," she said. "Kira Thorne. Are you lost, Thorne?" "No, drill sergeant." "You look lost. You look like you wandered into the wrong building and are too embarrassed to admit it." Behind her, someone snickered. Kira kept her eyes forward, her voice level. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, drill sergeant." Holloway studied her for another moment, then moved on, but Kira could feel the weight of judgment settling over her like a net. They had already decided who she was, what she could do, how long she would last. They had looked at her and seen limitation, seen weakness, seen someone who would break under the first real pressure. They had no idea what they were looking at. That night, lying on her bunk in the darkness, listening to the sounds of 23 strangers trying to sleep in a room that held no privacy, Kira thought about her grandfather. She thought about the photograph in her duffel, the one that showed him at 20 years old, standing in a jungle clearing half a world away, his rifle held with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly what it could do. The first week moved like a fever dream, all shouting and running and physical demands that separated the prepared from the pretenders. Kira watched 3 recruits quit before day 5, watched them pack their bags in silence while the rest of Delta Company stood at attention in the common area, bearing witness to failure. Morning PT started at 0430, when the sky was still black and the air carried a bite that disappeared the moment the sun cleared the horizon. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, running until her lungs burned and her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Kira kept pace, never at the front of the formation, but never falling behind, maintaining a steady middle position that drew no attention, provoked no comment. Vickers ran near the front, her longer legs eating up distance with aggressive efficiency. She had gathered a small group around her, 3 other women who moved as a unit, who ate together and studied together, and had already established themselves as the standard that other female recruits would be measured against. During the morning run on day 6, one of Vickers' group looked back at Kira, her expression mixing curiosity with dismissal. "How was the kid doing back there?" she called out, and several heads turned. Kira kept running, her breathing controlled, her pace unchanged. She had learned not to respond to provocation, not to waste energy on words when actions would eventually speak louder. The group laughed and faced forward again, increasing their speed slightly, putting more distance between themselves and the middle of the formation. In the barracks that night, Kira sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle, the M4 carbine they had been issued that afternoon. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, the weight and balance triggering muscle memory that had nothing to do with the brief training session they had received. She field-stripped it with quiet efficiency, her fingers moving through the process like a conversation she had memorized years ago. Across the bay, a male recruit named Torres watched her, his eyes narrowed. "You done that before?" he said, and it was not quite a question. Kira looked up, meeting his gaze. "Everyone just did it," she said. "In training today." Torres shook his head slowly. "Not like that. You move like you have been doing it your whole life." "I pay attention," Kira said, and returned to reassembling the weapon. The bolt carrier group slid home with a satisfying click, and she performed a function check, the mechanical sounds echoing in the relative quiet of the barracks. Torres stood and walked over, stopping a few feet from her bunk. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Montana," Kira said, which was true but not the whole truth. She had been born in Montana, had spent her childhood on a ranch that bordered national forest, had learned to shoot before she learned to drive. What she did not mention was the rest of it. The hours spent with her grandfather, the man who had served 3 tours in Vietnam, who had been a sniper before the Army fully acknowledged that snipers existed as a formal specialty. Montana, Torres repeated. That explains the shooting thing, I guess. Everybody out there hunts, right? Something like that, Kira said. The next morning brought their first marksmanship training, and Delta Company moved to the rifle range in a loose formation, voices rising in anticipation and bravado. The range sat on the eastern edge of the base, backed by a hill that served as a natural berm, targets arrayed at 50-meter intervals stretching out to 300 meters. Range Master Sergeant Chen stood at the firing line, her weathered face impassive as she watched the recruits file into position. She was short, compact, her movements economical and precise. When she spoke, her voice carried without shouting, a quality that demanded attention rather than commanding it. You will fire from the prone position, Chen said. Unsupported. Targets at 100 meters. This is a baseline qualification. I'm not expecting excellence. I'm expecting basic competence. Some of you will not achieve even that. Vickers was in the first group to fire. She took her position with confidence, her body settling into the proper stance with the certainty of someone who had done this before. When Chun gave the command, Vickers engaged her target with measured shots, the rifle reports cracking across the range in steady rhythm. The spotting scope revealed a tight grouping, most shots within the center rings. Chin nodded, made a notation on a roster, and called the next shooter forward. One by one, the recruits fired. Some shot well, some shot poorly. Some flinched with every trigger pull, their groups scattered across the target like buckshot. Kira watched from her position in the waiting area, observed the subtle mistakes, the tension in shoulders, the improper breathing, the anticipation of recoil. When her turn came, she moved to the firing line and assumed the prone position, feeling the ground beneath her solid and stable. The rifle settled against her shoulder, and she pressed her cheek to the stock, finding that perfect alignment where the sights and the target and her eye existed in the same plane of focus. Range is hot, Chin said. Engage your target. Kira exhaled slowly, her finger finding the trigger, that small curved piece of metal that connected intention to outcome. She had learned long ago that shooting was not about force, not about muscle or strength. It was about control. It was about finding stillness in the center of chaos, about making time slow down until you could see the space between heartbeats, the perfect moment when everything aligned. She fired 10 rounds, each shot a deliberate choice, each trigger pull happening at the exact moment when her body was most still, when her breathing was at its natural pause, when the rifle was an extension of her will rather than a tool in her hands. The magazine emptied, and she engaged the safety, waiting for Chun to check the target through the spotting scope. The range master studied the target for a long moment, then looked at Kira with an expression that was difficult to read. Who trained you? Chun asked. Kira stood, brushing dust from her uniform. I grew up hunting, she said. Chin's eyes narrowed slightly. That is not hunting. That is something else. I pay attention, Kira said, using the same words she had given Torres, knowing they were insufficient, but offering nothing more. Chun made a notation on a roster, and Kira saw her mark something beside her name, saw her underline it twice. The range master looked at her again, a long assessing look that felt like it saw through skin and bone to whatever lay beneath. You are full of surprises, Thorn, Chin said quietly. I wonder what other surprises you are hiding. Kira said nothing, and Chin dismissed her with a gesture. As Kira walked back to the waiting area, she felt eyes on her from every direction. The other recruits had seen something, had recognized that whatever had just happened at the firing line was different from what they had witnessed with the previous shooters. Vickers stood near the edge of the group, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When Kira passed, Vickers spoke just loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. Beginner's luck, she said. Let us see how she does when the pressure is actually on. Kira kept walking, but she caught Torres watching her, his expression thoughtful, like he was solving a puzzle that had suddenly become more complex than he expected. The whispers started before she reached her position, spreading through the formation like ripples across water. That night, lying in her bunk, Kira thought about the target, about the tight grouping that had drawn Chen's attention. She had been careful, had held back, had deliberately placed 2 shots outside the center ring to avoid standing out too much. But even that had not been enough. Even that had been too good, too clean, too precise for someone who was supposed to be learning for the first time. She touched the photograph in her pocket, the one of her grandfather, and remembered his words from years ago. Sometimes he had told her, the hardest part of being good at something is knowing when to hide it. Knowing when excellence will protect you and when it will make you a target. Week 3 brought hand-to-hand combat training, and the entire company assembled in the pit, a square of sand surrounded by wooden barriers where recruits would learn the fundamentals of close-quarters fighting. Drill Sergeant Holloway stood at the center, his boots planted wide, his voice carrying across the assembled formation with the weight of absolute authority. Combat is not about fairness, he said. Combat is about survival. When you're engaged with an enemy at close range, technique matters less than will. Size matters less than determination. Some of you have advantages in reach and weight. Some of you do not. The question is whether you have the heart to continue when every instinct tells you to quit. His eyes swept across the formation and stopped on Kira. Thorn, he called. Front and center. Kira stepped forward, moving through the ranks with measured steps. She felt the attention shift toward her, felt the anticipation building. This was what they had been waiting for, the moment when the small girl would be matched against someone larger, stronger, more physically imposing. The moment when reality would assert itself and natural order would be restored. Holloway gestured to the other side of the pit. Vickers, he said, you're up. Vickers moved forward with the confident stride of someone who had already won, who knew that physics and biology were on her side. She stood nearly 6 inches taller than Kira, outweighed her by 40 pounds at least, and carried herself with the aggressive certainty of someone who had played rugby in high school and knew how to use her body as a weapon. The 2 women faced each other across the sand, and Holloway stepped back to the edge of the pit. Basic grappling, he said. First person to achieve a submission, hold, or pin for 3 seconds wins. Fight until I say stop. Begin. Vickers moved first, closing the distance with a rushing tackle designed to use her weight and momentum to overwhelm her smaller opponent. It was a sound strategy, the kind of move that would work against most people Kira's size. But Kira had learned long ago that fighting was not about matching strength against strength. It was about angles and leverage and understanding how force moved through bodies. She sidestepped at the last possible moment, letting Vickers' momentum carry her past, using her own forward motion against her. Kira's hand found the back of Vickers' neck as she passed, adding just enough downward pressure to send her stumbling into the sand face first. The watching recruits murmured, and Holloway's eyebrows rose fractionally. Vickers pushed herself up, sand clinging to her uniform, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She came at Kira again, more cautiously this time, her hands up in a proper guard position. They circled each other, and Kira remained light on her feet, her weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. Vickers feinted left and shot low, trying for a leg takedown. Kira sprawled, posting her hands on Vickers' back and driving her weight downward, preventing the takedown from succeeding. Vickers strained, muscles bunching with effort, but Kira had position and leverage, and position was everything. Kira slipped to the side, wrapped her arm around Vickers' neck, and applied pressure in a basic rear naked choke. Not enough to actually choke her out, but enough that Vickers had to tap against Kira's forearm twice in rapid succession, the universal signal of submission. Holloway called the match, and both women separated, breathing hard. Kira offered her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Vickers took it, her grip tight enough to hurt. Lucky, Vickers said quietly, her voice low enough that only Kira could hear. Maybe, Kira said, releasing her hand and stepping back. The training continued throughout the morning, and Kira was matched against 3 more opponents, all larger than her, all convinced they would be the one to put her down. One by one, she defeated them, not through overwhelming force, but through technical precision, through understanding where their balance was weakest, where their strength created vulnerabilities, where their size became a liability rather than an advantage. By lunch, the whispers had grown louder. The other recruits watched her with expressions that ranged from respect to resentment to something that looked like suspicion. She was not supposed to be this good. Small girls were not supposed to throw people twice their size. Rookies were not supposed to move with the calm efficiency of someone who had been training for years. In the chow hall, Torres sat down across from her, setting his tray on the table with deliberate care. "You're making people nervous," he said. Kira looked up from her food. "I am just doing what we are trained to do," she said. "No," Torres said, shaking his head. "You are doing more than that. Way more. Where did you really learn to fight like that?" "Montana," Kira said again, knowing it was not enough, knowing that the simple answer was starting to sound like evasion. Torres leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, I do not care what your background is, but you need to understand that people are starting to talk. They think you are hiding something. They think maybe you had prior service. Maybe you washed out somewhere else and are trying again." "I have never served before," Kira said, which was the truth. She had never worn a uniform until 3 weeks ago, had never officially been part of any military unit or organization. What she had done with her grandfather, the training he had given her from the age of 10 until his death 2 years ago, that existed outside official records, outside the documentation that defined service. "Then you need to figure out how to explain what you can do," Torres said. "Because right now, you are becoming a problem. And problems get special attention from the drill sergeants, and not the good kind." That afternoon brought land navigation training, and the company moved to the forested area at the northeast corner of the base. Each recruit was issued a map, a compass, and a list of waypoints to locate before sundown. It was meant to be challenging, meant to separate those who could read terrain from those who would get lost 50 meters into the woods. Kira studied her map for 90 seconds, memorizing the topography, the elevation changes, the water features that served as natural landmarks. She did not need the compass for most of the route. She could read the sun's position, could feel the subtle slope of the land beneath her feet, could navigate by the shape of trees and the flow of water. She moved through the forest like smoke, finding each waypoint with mechanical precision, marking her card and moving to the next objective without hesitation. Other recruits crashed through the underbrush, calling out to each other, checking and rechecking their compasses, backtracking when they realized they had gone the wrong direction. Kira finished in 42 minutes, the first person back to the rally point. Holloway checked her card, verified each waypoint marker, and looked at her with an expression that was impossible to read. "How long did you practice this course before today?" he asked. "I did not," Kira said. "You expect me to believe you navigated 6 waypoints across 3 miles of forest in under an hour without prior knowledge of this terrain?" "Yes, drill sergeant." Holloway studied her for a long moment, and Kira kept her expression neutral, her posture correct, giving him nothing beyond the simple statement of fact. Finally, he dismissed her with a gesture, but she saw him make another notation beside her name, saw him underline something twice. The other recruits began filtering back over the next 2 hours, some triumphant, some frustrated, some having given up and simply followed other people to the waypoints. Vickers returned with her group, and when she saw Kira sitting near the rally point, her jaw tightened. That night, Kira lay in her bunk and listened to the conversations happening in hushed tones around the barracks. She heard her name multiple times, heard speculation about her background, heard someone suggest that maybe she was part of some special program, some test to see how the regular recruits would respond to someone extraordinary. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandfather's words, spoken on a cold morning when she was 15 and had just completed a particularly difficult shot. He had looked at her with an expression mixing pride and concern. "You have a gift," he had said, "but gifts can be curses if you do not know when to use them. The world is not kind to people who stand out too much, who make others feel inadequate. You will have to decide, when the time comes, whether to hide what you are or let everyone see. Both choices have consequences. Kira had not understood then. She was beginning to understand now. Week 5 arrived with unexpected news. Delta Company would be participating in a joint training exercise with Charlie Company, a unit that had been on base for 3 months and was approaching the end of their basic training cycle. The exercise would be a force-on-force engagement using simulation rounds, a chance for the newer recruits to test themselves against soldiers who had already learned the lessons they were still struggling to master. Holloway briefed them in the common area, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this scenario play out dozens of times. Charlie Company has the advantage of experience, he said. They know the terrain. They know the tactics. They will expect you to be disorganized and afraid. Your job is to prove them wrong. You will be divided into fire teams. Each team will have an objective. Complete your objective or be eliminated trying. Kira found herself assigned to a 4-person team with Torres, a quiet recruit named Walsh who rarely spoke, and a loud, stocky man named Dunmore who had spent most of basic training talking about his plans to become a ranger. Dunmore immediately assumed leadership of their team, his voice booming as he outlined his strategy. We go in fast and aggressive, he said. Overwhelming force. They won't expect us to attack head-on. We hit them before they can set up defensive positions. Torres glanced at Kira, and she saw the doubt in his eyes. Walsh said nothing, just checked his rifle and magazines with methodical precision. Kira studied the map Holloway had provided, noting the terrain features, the natural choke points, the positions where Charlie Company would likely establish their defense. Their objective was a small concrete building at the center of the training area, designated as a high-value target they needed to secure. Charlie Company's objective was to defend it. The math was simple and unforgiving. The defenders had every advantage. The exercise began at dawn, and Dunmore led them forward at a near run, convinced that speed and surprise would carry them through. They made it exactly 200 meters before the first simulation rounds found them, bright yellow paint marking Torres across the chest. He dropped to a knee, officially eliminated, and Dunmore cursed loudly. Suppressive fire, Dunmore shouted, opening up toward the tree line where the shots had originated. Walsh joined him, both men burning through ammunition in seconds, their shots wild and undisciplined. Kira dropped to the prone position behind a fallen log, her breathing controlled, her eyes scanning the terrain with systematic precision. She saw them then, 3 members of Charlie Company, well concealed in a fighting position that gave them overlapping fields of fire. They were reloading, confident that the noise and chaos would prevent the newer recruits from organizing an effective response. Dunmore and Walsh were focused on the wrong area, shooting at shadows while the real threat remained untouched. Kira aimed at the first target, a soldier whose head and shoulders were visible above the edge of their foxhole. She exhaled slowly, found that moment of stillness, and pressed the trigger. The simulation round struck him in the center of his chest. Before his teammates could react, she had shifted to the second target, fired, and hit. The third soldier recognized the danger and ducked lower, but Kira had already marked his position, had already calculated the angle. She waited 3 seconds, watching for the smallest movement, and when he shifted to change position, she fired again. 3 shots, 3 hits. The enemy position was neutralized. Dunmore stopped firing and stared at her, his expression caught between amazement and something that looked like offense. Walsh lowered his rifle slowly, his eyes wide. In the distance, a whistle blew, and an observer emerged from concealment, marking the 3 Charlie Company soldiers as eliminated. The exercise continued for another 90 minutes, and word spread quickly through both companies about the team that had taken out an entire defensive position with 3 shots. By the time they reached the objective building, Charlie Company had shifted their entire defensive strategy, focusing additional personnel on the sector where Kira's team was operating. It did not matter. Kira moved through the terrain like water, finding its path, identifying targets before they identified her, taking shots that seemed impossible to the observers who watched from designated safe positions. Dunmore stopped trying to lead and simply followed her movements, recognizing that whatever authority he thought he possessed had been superseded by pure competence. When the exercise ended, Delta Company had secured their objective, and Kira's team was credited with 11 confirmed eliminations. No other team from Delta Company had more than 3. The Charlie Company members who had been eliminated by Kira found her during the after-action review, wanting to see the recruit who had shot like a veteran. One of them, a tall woman with corporal stripes and a skeptical expression, stood in front of Kira and crossed her arms. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" she asked. "Montana," Kira said, and the corporal laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Montana," she repeated. "Right? I have been shooting my entire life, trained with my state's competitive rifle team, scored expert on every qualification since I enlisted. You just made me look like I picked up a rifle yesterday." "I got lucky," Kira said, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded now. "That was not luck," the corporal said. "That was something else entirely. And the people in charge are going to notice, if they have not already." She was right. That evening, Kira was called to Holloway's office, a small room adjacent to the barracks that smelled of coffee and old paper. Holloway sat behind a metal desk, and beside him stood Range Master Sergeant Chun, her expression unreadable. "Sit down, Thorne," Holloway said, gesturing to a chair. Kira sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She knew what was coming, had been expecting this conversation since the first range day, since the moment she had let her skills show more than she intended. "I have been reviewing your file," Holloway said. "Born in Montana. No prior military service. No formal training listed anywhere. Your recruitment paperwork indicates you worked on a ranch before enlisting. Nothing that would explain what we have been observing for the past 5 weeks." He paused, waiting for her to fill the silence. Kira said nothing. Chun leaned forward, her voice quieter than Holloway's, but somehow more intense. "I have been training soldiers for 15 years, she said. "I have seen natural talent. I have seen people who were born with good hand-eye coordination and steady nerves. What you demonstrated today was not natural talent. That was trained skill. Years of trained skill." Kira met her eyes directly. "My grandfather was a soldier," she said. "He taught me to shoot when I was young." "Your grandfather," Holloway repeated, flipping through papers. "There is no mention of family military service in your file." "He did not talk about it much," Kira said. "He served in Vietnam. He taught me things when I was growing up. We spent a lot of time in the mountains." Chen's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering across her features. "What was your grandfather's name?" she asked. Kira hesitated for just a moment, knowing that once she said the name, everything would change. "Thomas Thorne," she said quietly. Chen's eyes widened fractionally, and she exchanged a glance with Holloway. Holloway set down the papers and leaned back in his chair, studying Kira with new intensity. "Thomas Thorne," he said slowly. "The ghost of Khe Sanh." Kira said nothing, but her silence was confirmation enough. Her grandfather's reputation had been legendary, even if the official records were sparse, even if most of his missions had been classified for decades. Among people who understood the history of military snipers, who knew the stories that were passed down through generations, Thomas Thorne was a name that carried weight. Chen shook her head slowly. "He was one of the best," she said. "Maybe the best. If he trained you personally from childhood, that explains a lot." "It also complicates things," Holloway added. He looked at Kira directly. "You have skills that put you far beyond basic training level, probably beyond most soldiers with years of service. That makes you valuable, but also makes you a problem. We cannot put you in with regular recruits anymore. You're skewing the training metrics. You're making everyone else look incompetent by comparison." "I'm just trying to complete training," Kira said. "No, you are far past completing training. The question now is what we do with you." The decision came down 3 days later. Kira would remain with Delta Company through the end of basic training, but she would be flagged for advanced marksmanship evaluation immediately after graduation. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. The other recruits knew she was different now, knew that something had shifted in how the command staff viewed her, and that knowledge created distance where before there had only been dismissal. Vickers stopped speaking to her entirely. The morning runs became exercises in isolation, with Kira running in the middle of the formation while space opened up around her like a bubble. In the chow hall, tables filled up before she arrived, leaving her to eat alone or with Torres, who seemed to be the only person willing to acknowledge her existence beyond what was required. "You have become a ghost," Torres said one evening, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "People are afraid that if they associate with you, they will get special attention too. Or maybe they're just afraid of you." Kira pushed food around her tray without much interest in eating it. "I did not ask for any of this," she said. "No," Torres agreed. "But you got it anyway. That is how it works. Excellence makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them of their own limitations." Week 7 brought advanced marksmanship training for the entire company, but for Kira, it meant something different. While the other recruits practiced at 200 meters with iron sights, she was taken to a different range, one set back in the hills where the distances stretched to 600 meters and beyond. Chen accompanied her, along with a man Kira had not met before, a captain named Reeves who wore the crossed rifles insignia of infantry and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen combat. "Private Thorne," Reeves said as they walked to the firing line, "I have reviewed the reports from your training. I have also made some calls to people who knew your grandfather. The stories about him are remarkable, even accounting for the usual exaggeration that surrounds legends." "He was a good teacher," Kira said carefully. Reeves stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "I'm not here to test whether you can shoot," he said. "Chen has already confirmed you can shoot better than most soldiers with 10 years of service. I'm here to see if you can shoot under pressure, if you can perform when it matters. Anyone can be accurate on a controlled range. Combat is different." "I understand," Kira said. "I do not think you do," Reeves replied. "You are 18 years old. You have never been deployed. You have never had someone shooting back at you. What your grandfather taught you is valuable, but it is not the same as the real thing. Today, we find out if you can handle the psychological component." They reached the firing line, and Kira saw the setup immediately. It was not a standard qualification course. The targets were smaller, positioned at varying distances, some partially concealed behind barriers, some elevated, some in shadows that made them difficult to identify. There was a clock visible, counting down from 10 minutes. "You have 10 minutes, Reeves said. 20 targets. Each one will be exposed for 5 seconds. Then it will drop and a new one will appear. You will not know where the next target will be. You will not have time to settle into a comfortable position between shots. You will be moving, adjusting, acquiring, and firing continuously. Miss more than 3 targets, and you fail." Chen handed her a rifle, different from the standard M4 she had been using. This was a precision weapon, an M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle with a variable powered scope. Kira checked the weapon automatically, confirmed it was loaded, adjusted the scope to her eye relief. "Ready?" Reeves asked. Kira nodded, and the clock started counting down. The first target appeared at 400 meters, a partial silhouette behind a barrier. Kira acquired it, adjusted for wind and distance, fired. The target dropped. Immediately, a second target popped up at 200 meters, elevated on a platform. She shifted, compensated for the new distance, fired. Hit. The pace was relentless. Targets appeared and disappeared with mechanical precision, forcing her to move along the firing line, changing positions, adjusting for different angles and distances. 300 meters, 500 meters, 100 meters. Each shot had to be perfect, had to be instant, had to happen in that narrow window before the target dropped. Kira fell into the rhythm her grandfather had taught her, the state of mind where conscious thought disappeared and instinct took over. She stopped hearing the rifle reports, stopped feeling the recoil, stopped being aware of her body as something separate from the weapon. There was only the target, the sight picture, the trigger press, the next target. For minutes in, a target appeared at 550 meters, partially concealed by foliage, only the upper third of the silhouette visible. It was a shot most soldiers would skip, would accept as a loss rather than waste time attempting. Kira did not hesitate. She adjusted for the distance, led slightly for the wind she felt on her face, and fired. The target dropped. 6 minutes. 8 minutes. The clock continued its countdown, and the targets continued their mechanical dance. Kira's breathing remained steady, her heart rate controlled, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the loading and firing sequence. The final target appeared at 600 meters, the maximum range of the course, a small silhouette that would be challenging even with unlimited time. Kira had 12 seconds left on the clock. She dropped to prone, settled the rifle, found the target in her scope, made the calculations that her grandfather had drilled into her until they became automatic. Distance, wind, elevation, the angle of the sun, the density of the air. She fired with 3 seconds remaining on the clock, and the target dropped. The range fell silent. Reeves walked to the control booth, checked the electronic scoring system, then walked back to where Kira stood. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. 20 targets, he said. 20 hits. Most experienced snipers will be proud of 16 or 17 under these conditions. You did not miss once. My grandfather taught me not to miss, Kira said quietly. Reeves nodded slowly. I'm going to be honest with you, Private Thorne. What you just demonstrated is beyond advanced. This is not something we can keep quiet. Word will spread. People will want to know about you. Some of those people will be your fellow soldiers. Some will be officers looking for talent. Some will be people who see you as a threat to their own status. I just want to serve, Kira said. That is admirable, Reeves replied. But you need to understand that you do not get to just serve anymore. You are too good. That makes you a resource, and resources get used. Sometimes in ways you would not choose for yourself. Chun stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. What Captain Reeves is trying to say is that your life is about to become complicated. The Army will want to fast-track you to sniper school. They will want to showcase you to prove that their training programs work. They will put pressure on you that most soldiers never face. Can I refuse? Kira asked. Reeves and Chun exchanged a glance. Technically, yes, Reeves said. Practically, no. Not if you want a career in the military. Not if you want to use the skills you have. You will be given opportunities that other soldiers would kill for. Turning them down would be seen as wasting potential, and the Army does not like waste. That night, back in the barracks, Kira lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Around her, the other recruits talked in hushed voices, and she heard her name mentioned more than once. The isolation had deepened, had hardened into something that felt permanent. She was no longer one of them, no longer a regular recruit trying to survive basic training. She thought about her grandfather's warning, about the consequences of letting people see what you could do. He had lived through those consequences, had spent years after Vietnam trying to be invisible, trying to fade into the Montana wilderness where nobody asked questions about what he had done or what he could still do. But he had also taught her that some skills came with responsibility, that if you had the ability to protect people, to make a difference, then hiding that ability was its own kind of failure. Kira closed her eyes and made her choice. She would not hide anymore. She would not pretend to be less than she was. Whatever came next, whatever pressure or attention or complications, she would face them the way her grandfather had taught her to face everything else. With precision, with courage, with the understanding that excellence always carried a price, and that price was worth paying. Week 9 brought a shift in the atmosphere that Kira felt before she could name it. The isolation that had surrounded her began to curdle into something darker, something that felt less like fear and more like resentment. It started with small things. Her gear going missing before morning formation. Her bunk being short-sheeted. The kind of harassment that happened to recruits who did not fit in, who threatened the established order. Vickers was at the center of it, though she was careful never to be directly involved. She simply created the space where others felt emboldened to act, where the unspoken permission existed to make Kira's life difficult. During a ruck march in week 10, someone loosened the straps on Kira's pack so that weight distribution became painful after the first mile. During a barracks inspection, cleaning supplies were hidden in her wall locker, guaranteeing she would fail the inspection. Kira endured it without complaint, recognizing that responding would only escalate the situation. But Torres noticed, and one evening after lights out, He moved to her bunk and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You need to do something about this," he said. "It is only going to get worse." "What would you suggest?" Kira asked quietly. "Stand up for yourself. Show them that messing with you has consequences." "That is what they want," Kira said. "They want me to lose control, to prove that I'm not as disciplined as everyone thinks." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Then you are tougher than I am," he said, "because I would have broken someone's nose by now." "Violence is not always the answer," Kira replied. "Sometimes the best response is patience." But patience had limits, and those limits were tested during Week 11 when the company conducted night operations training. They were divided into teams and sent into the forest with night vision equipment, tasked with locating and securing designated objectives in complete darkness. Kira's team consisted of herself, Vickers, Walsh, and a recruit named Brennan who had allied himself with Vickers' group. The mission brief was simple. Navigate 2 miles through wooded terrain, locate a supply cache, and return to base. Time limit was 4 hours. Kira studied the map while Vickers outlined her plan, which involved taking the most direct route regardless of terrain difficulty. "We should follow the ridge line," Kira said, pointing to an alternate route on the map. "It adds distance, but the terrain is easier to navigate in darkness. We will make better time." Vickers looked at her with cold eyes. "Nobody asked your opinion," she said. "We are going straight through, unless you are afraid of a little rough terrain." "I'm not afraid," Kira said evenly. "I am being practical." "Then shut up and follow orders," Vickers snapped. They moved into the forest as darkness fell, the night vision equipment turning the world into shades of green and gray. The direct route Vickers had chosen led through dense underbrush and steep ravines, terrain that was challenging in daylight and treacherous at night. Within 30 minutes, Walsh had twisted his ankle on a hidden route, and Brennan had torn his uniform on thorns. Kira moved through the darkness with practiced ease, her grandfather's training serving her well. He had taught her to navigate at night without equipment, to read the forest by sound and feel, to move through darkness as naturally as others moved through daylight. She could have reached the objective in half the time, but she stayed with her team, matching their slower pace. 2 hours in, they were hopelessly lost. Vickers had led them in a circle, too proud to admit she had misread the terrain, too stubborn to accept that her plan had failed. Walsh was limping badly, and Brennan was complaining about the cold and the difficulty and the unfairness of the entire exercise. Kira checked her compass, oriented herself to the map, and calculated their actual position. They were 800 meters south of where Vickers thought they were, and the objective was now northeast rather than due north. "We need to adjust our heading," Kira said, her voice calm but firm. "We are off course." Vickers spun on her, anger bright in her face even through the green wash of night vision. "You do not get to tell me what to do," she said. "I am team leader. We continue north." "If we continue north, we will miss the objective entirely," Kira said. "We will fail the mission." "Better to fail than to follow a know-it-all rookie who thinks she is better than everyone else," Vickers said, and there was real venom in her voice now, all the resentment and jealousy that had been building for weeks finally breaking through. Walsh spoke up, his voice tight with pain. "Maybe we should listen to her. My ankle is getting worse. If we are lost, we need to figure out now." Vickers ignored him and started walking north. Brennan followed without question, his loyalty to Vickers outweighing any concern about mission success. Walsh looked at Kira, uncertainty written across his features. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Kira had a choice. She could follow Vickers and let the mission fail, proving a point about leadership and consequences. Or she could break from the team and complete the objective herself, which would be seen as insubordination but would at least accomplish what they had been sent to do. She thought about her grandfather, about the lessons he had taught her that went beyond marksmanship and navigation. He had told her that sometimes the hardest decisions were not between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right. Sometimes you had to choose between loyalty to the team and loyalty to the mission. "Stay with them," Kira told Walsh. "Keep pressure off that ankle as much as you can. I'm going to find the objective." "That is direct disobedience," Walsh said, but there was relief in his voice. I know, Kira replied, but someone has to complete this mission. She broke away from the group, moving northeast through the forest with speed that would have been reckless for anyone else. But she knew this kind of terrain, had spent years moving through Montana wilderness at night, had learned to trust her instincts and her training. Within 20 minutes, she had located the supply cache, a locked box marked with reflective tape that glowed bright green through her night vision. She marked her card with the timestamp, then made her way back to the team. She found them 40 minutes later, still wandering in the wrong direction, Vickers too proud to admit she was lost, too stubborn to call for extraction. I found the objective, Kira said simply, showing her mark card. Vickers' face went through several expressions in rapid succession, ending on something that looked like hatred. You left the team, she said. That is abandonment. That is a violation of every principle we have been taught. The objective was to secure the cache, Kira said. That has been accomplished. The mission is complete. For you maybe, Vickers said, but when we get back, I am reporting this. You will be written up for insubordination, for breaking team cohesion, for putting personal glory above unit integrity. Do what you think is right, Kira said. But right now, we need to get Walsh back to base. His ankle needs medical attention. The return journey was conducted in hostile silence, with Vickers leading them on yet another inefficient route, while Kira followed, knowing that any suggestion would be rejected out of spite. They arrived back at base 3 hours and 40 minutes after departure, barely making the deadline. Holloway was waiting at the rally point, and his expression when he saw them told Kira that he already knew what had happened. The night vision equipment had GPS tracking. He had watched their entire route, had seen Vickers lead them in circles, had seen Kira break away and complete the objective alone. Vickers, Thorne, he said. My office. Now. They followed him to the small administrative building, neither speaking, the tension between them thick enough to cut. In the office, Holloway sat behind his desk and looked at both of them for a long moment before speaking. I watched your entire mission, he said. I saw everything. Vickers, you led your team in circles for 2 hours because you were too proud to admit you were lost. Thorne, you broke from your team and completed the objective alone, demonstrating individual competence, but questionable judgment regarding team cohesion. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Under normal circumstances, I would punish both of you. Vickers for poor leadership and endangering her team. Thorne for insubordination. But these are not normal circumstances. Walsh needed medical attention. The mission needed to be completed. Sometimes leadership means knowing when to follow, and sometimes it means knowing when to act alone. Holloway looked directly at Vickers. You were relieved as team leader, effective immediately. Your pride got in the way of mission success. That is unacceptable. Then he turned to Kira. As for you, Private Thorne, you made the right tactical decision, but you made it in the worst possible way. You isolated yourself further. You gave people more reason to resent you. Excellence without wisdom is just another kind of failure. Both of you are dismissed, he said. Outside the office, Vickers turned to Kira, her voice low and dangerous. This is not over, she said. You think you're special. You think being good at shooting makes you better than everyone else. But you are alone. You have no allies. And eventually, that is going to matter more than how good you are with a rifle. She walked away, leaving Kira standing in the darkness, knowing that Vickers was right about one thing. She was alone. And the question was whether that solitude would be her strength or her breaking point. Week 12 marked the beginning of the final phase of basic training, and with it came news that changed everything. Delta Company would be hosting a demonstration for visiting officers from Fort Bragg, senior personnel evaluating training protocols and identifying exceptional talent for specialized programs. The demonstration would include marksmanship, tactical exercises, and hand-to-hand combat, a showcase of everything the recruits had learned over 3 months. Captain Reeves arrived the morning before the demonstration, accompanied by 3 officers Kira did not recognize, all of them wearing insignia that marked them as special operations. They observed morning PT without comment, watched the company move through drill exercises with clinical detachment, took notes on tablets, and spoke in voices too low to overhear. During lunch, Holloway called Kira to his office again. Reeves was there, along with Chun and a colonel whose name tape read Ashford. The colonel was in his 50s, graying at the temples, carrying himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Private Thorne," Ashford said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." Kira sat, keeping her posture correct, her hands folded in her lap. The office felt smaller with 4 people in it, the air thick with unspoken purpose. "I have read your file," Ashford continued. "I have reviewed your training scores. I have watched footage of your performance on the range and during field exercises. Captain Reeves speaks highly of your potential, and Sergeant Chun considers you one of the most naturally gifted marksmen she has seen in 15 years of instruction." He paused, studying her with eyes that seemed to see past surface details to something deeper. "Tomorrow's demonstration includes a long-range marksmanship component," he said. "The scenario involves engaging targets at distances between 400 and 800 meters under time pressure. Most of our recruits will struggle at those ranges. You will not. The question is whether you are willing to demonstrate your full capabilities in front of an audience that includes people who will make decisions about your career." Kira met his gaze directly. "What kind of decisions?" she asked. "The kind that could fast-track you to sniper school," Ashford said. "The kind that could put you in specialized units where your skills would be utilized at their highest level. The kind that would separate you from conventional infantry and place you in a very different world." "And if I prefer to stay with conventional infantry," Kira asked, "then you would be wasting extraordinary talent," Ashford replied. "But the choice is yours. We do not force soldiers into specializations they do not want. We can only offer opportunities and let you decide if you want to take them." That evening, the barracks buzzed with nervous energy as recruits prepared for the demonstration. Everyone wanted to perform well, to impress the visiting officers, to prove they belonged in the Army. But the pressure Kira felt was different, more personal, weighted with the knowledge that tomorrow would determine the trajectory of her entire military career. Torres found her outside after evening formation, his expression concerned. "You okay?" he asked. Kira looked up at the darkening sky, watching the first stars appear. "I do not know what I want," she said quietly. "My grandfather spent his entire life being invisible after the war. He told me that being exceptional made you a target, made you someone who could never just be normal again." Torres nodded slowly. "But he also trained you," he said. "He gave you these skills. That has to mean something." "Maybe he was preparing me to choose differently than he did," Kira said. "Maybe he wanted me to have the option he never had." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Torres spoke again. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, just know that not everyone resents you. Some of us know what it looks like when someone is genuinely talented. Some of us respect that, even if we cannot do what you do." "Thank you," Kira said, and meant it. The demonstration began at 0800 with the entire company assembled in formation while the visiting officers took positions on an observation platform. Ashford stood at the center, flanked by his staff, watching with expressions that revealed nothing. The morning air was cool, the sky cloudless, conditions perfect for marksmanship. The first events were standard, recruits demonstrating basic rifle handling, tactical movement, radio procedures. Kira participated without standing out, performing competently, but not exceptionally, still uncertain about how much of herself to reveal. She watched Vickers demonstrate hand-to-hand combat techniques with aggressive precision, watched other recruits showcase their strengths, saw the officers taking notes and marking their tablets. Then came the long-range marksmanship demonstration, and everything changed. Chun called Kira forward first, along with 5 other recruits who had scored highest on previous range qualifications. The firing line had been set up with precision rifles, and downrange the targets waited at staggered distances, marked with flags indicating 400, 500, 600, 700, and 800 meters. Each shooter would engage 5 targets, one at each distance, in sequence, Chun explained. "You have 90 seconds total. This is not about taking your time. This is about performing under pressure, making rapid adjustments, executing under conditions that simulate combat stress." The first recruit took position and managed 3 hits out of 5, missing the 700 and 800-meter targets. The second recruit hit 4 out of 5, a respectable showing that drew approving nods from the officers. The third and fourth recruits each hit 3 targets. The fifth recruit, a man named Patterson who had been shooting competitively since childhood, hit all 5 targets with time to spare, and the company erupted in applause. Then it was Kira's turn. She took position at the firing line, feeling the weight of attention from every direction. The visiting officers leaned forward slightly, their interest visible now. Holloway stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Torres watched from the formation with something that looked like hope, and Vickers stood nearby, her face showing barely concealed anticipation, waiting for Kira to fail, to prove that all the attention and special treatment had been undeserved. Chin started the clock, and Kira began. 400 meters. Acquire target. Adjust for distance. Fire. Hit. 500 meters. New position. Calculate wind drift. Fire. Hit. 600 meters. Rapid adjustment. Compensate for bullet drop. Fire. Hit. 700 meters. Smaller target. Longer flight time. Find the stillness. Fire. Hit. 800 meters. Maximum effective range for the weapon. Every variable matters. Distance, wind, temperature, the angle of the rifle, the curve of the earth itself. She had 30 seconds left on the clock. Most shooters would rush, would force the shot, would let the pressure create mistakes. Kira did not rush. She found her breathing, found that space between heartbeats that her grandfather had taught her to inhabit. She saw the target clearly through her scope, saw the wind flags indicating a 3/4 value wind from the left, calculated the hold off, the elevation adjustment, the precise moment when everything aligned. She fired with 12 seconds remaining. The spotter called the hit, and the range fell absolutely silent. 5 targets. 5 hits. Faster than Patterson, more precise than anyone else, executing at a level that made it clear she was operating in a different category entirely. Ashford stood and walked to the firing line, stopping directly in front of Kira. The rest of the officers followed, forming a semicircle that felt both intimidating and respectful. The entire company watched, and Kira could feel the shift in atmosphere, the moment when perception changed from skepticism to recognition. Private Thorne, Ashford said, his voice carrying across the range. What you just demonstrated is not typical. It is not even excellent. It is exceptional in the truest sense of the word. I want you to understand what that means. He gestured to the targets downrange. Most soldiers will never hit an 800-meter target in combat conditions, he continued. Most snipers need time and preparation to make that shot. You made it look routine. That tells me everything I need to know about your training and your potential. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. You have a decision to make about your future, he said. But before you make it, I want you to understand something. Excellence like yours is rare. It is valuable, and it carries responsibility. If you choose to pursue this path, you will be asked to do things that most soldiers never face. You will be placed in positions where lives depend on your ability to perform under impossible conditions. Kira stood at attention, feeling the eyes of every person on the range focused on her. She thought about her grandfather, about the choices he had made, about the life he had lived in the shadows of his own capabilities. She thought about the isolation of the past 12 weeks, the resentment and harassment and loneliness that had come from being different. And she thought about Torres's words, about how her grandfather had given her these skills for a reason, about how maybe his training had been meant to prepare her to choose a different path than he had walked. She made her decision in that moment, standing on the firing line with the visiting officers waiting for her response, with her company watching to see what the ghost among them would choose. I want to pursue sniper training, she said clearly. I want to use these skills to serve. The final 3 weeks of basic training passed in a strange liminal state where Kira existed both within Delta Company and separate from it. The official decision had been made. Upon graduation, she would report to Fort Benning for the Special Operations Preparation Course, a demanding program designed to prepare candidates for selection into specialized units. After that, if she succeeded, would come sniper school. The other recruits treated her differently now. The harassment stopped, replaced by a respectful distance that felt almost worse than the hostility. They had seen what she could do, had watched the visiting officers treat her like someone exceptional, and that recognition created a barrier more effective than any amount of resentment could have built. Even Vickers withdrew into cold silence, her campaign against Kira abandoned in the face of official acknowledgement that the girl she had tried to break was destined for something far beyond their shared experience. During the final field exercise, when teams were assigned, Vickers and Kira were placed together one last time, and they moved through the scenario with professional efficiency, but no warmth. Two people who would separate after graduation and likely never cross paths again. Torres remained her one consistent connection, and during the last week, they sat together outside the barracks watching the sun set over the training grounds. "You're going to do incredible things," he said. "Everyone knows it now." "I am terrified," Kira admitted, the first time she had spoken the feeling aloud. "Of what?" Torres asked. "Of not being good enough when it actually matters," she said. "Of my grandfather's training being insufficient for real combat. Of letting people down who are counting on me to perform." Torres shook his head slowly. "That is not what you should be afraid of," he said. "You should be afraid of becoming so good that you forget what it is like to be human, that you turn into just a weapon instead of a person who uses weapons." Kira looked at him, surprised by the insight. "How do I avoid that?" she asked. "Remember this," Torres said, gesturing to the barracks, the training grounds, the ordinary spaces where ordinary soldiers learned ordinary skills. Remember what it was like before everyone knew what you could do. Remember that being exceptional does not make you better than other people, just different. "I will remember," Kira said. Graduation day arrived with ceremony and formality. The entire company assembled in dress uniforms, while families filled the bleachers and officers made speeches about service and sacrifice and the proud tradition of the infantry. Kira's section of the bleachers remained empty. She had no family to invite, no one to witness this transition from civilian to soldier, except the ghost of her grandfather who had started her on this path years before. Holloway called each recruit forward to receive their completion certificate, and when Kira's name was announced, the applause was notably louder than for others, a recognition of the attention she had brought to Delta Company. She walked across the stage, accepted her certificate from Holloway, and saw something in his expression that might have been pride or might have been relief that she was no longer his responsibility. After the ceremony, as recruits scattered to find their families or load buses to their next assignments, Ashford approached Kira, where she stood alone near the edge of the parade ground. He carried a folder under his arm, official documents that would determine her immediate future. "Private Thorne," he said, "or perhaps I should say Specialist Thorne, given that you will be promoted upon arrival at Fort Benning." "Kira ist reizend." "I was not expecting promotion," she said. "Your performance warranted it," Ashford replied. "But that is not why I am here. I want to give you some advice before you begin the next phase of your training." He gestured to a bench, and they sat, the parade ground emptying around them as the graduation crowd dispersed. "You are about to enter a world where everyone is exceptional," Ashford said, "where being the best in basic training means very little because everyone there was the best in their basic training. You will be challenged in ways you cannot anticipate. Some of those challenges will be physical. Some will be mental. Some will be about learning to work with other people who are just as talented and just as driven as you are." "I understand," Kira said. "I do not think you do," Ashford replied gently. "You have spent the last 3 months being isolated because of your abilities. At Fort Benning, you will be surrounded by people with similar abilities, and the isolation will come from different sources. From the pressure to perform. From the knowledge that failure means being sent back to conventional units. From the weight of knowing that the skills you are learning will be used in situations where mistakes cost lives." He opened the folder and showed her several photographs, images of soldiers in combat, faces tight with concentration and fear and determination. "These are graduates of the programs you are about to enter," he said. "Some of them are still serving. Some of them are not. All of them made the same choice you made, to pursue excellence even when it separated them from normal military life. I want you to understand what that choice means in practical terms. Kira studied the photographs, seeing in those faces something she recognized from her grandfather's eyes, a particular kind of awareness that came from operating at the edge of human capability. "What do you want me to take away from this?" she asked. "That excellence is not an endpoint," Ashford said. "It is a beginning. What you have done so far has been impressive, but it has also been relatively safe. Basic training is controlled. Sniper school is controlled. Combat is not. When you are deployed, when you're given a mission where success or failure has real consequences, that is when you will discover whether your grandfather's training was enough." He closed the folder and looked at her directly. "I believe you have the potential to be one of the best," he said. "But potential means nothing without the wisdom to use it properly. Stay humble. Stay teachable. And remember that being a great sniper is not just about making difficult shots. It is about knowing when to take those shots and when to hold fire. It is about judgment as much as skill." Kira absorbed his words, feeling the weight of them settle into her understanding of what lay ahead. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. Ashford stood, and Kira stood with him. He extended his hand, and she shook it, feeling the strength in his grip and the respect behind it. "I will be following your career with interest," he said. "Do not disappoint me." "I will do my best," Kira replied. "Your best is more than most people's best," Ashford said with a slight smile. "That is both your gift and your burden. Learn to carry it well." He walked away, leaving Kira standing alone on the parade ground as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty space. In 3 days, she would report to Fort Benning. She would begin training that would push her beyond anything she had experienced in Montana with her grandfather, beyond anything basic training had demanded. She would be tested against people who had their own stories, their own talents, their own reasons for pursuing a path that separated them from conventional soldiers. That night, in the empty barracks where Delta Company had once lived, Kira packed her few belongings and found the photograph of her grandfather tucked in the bottom of her duffel. She studied his face, seeing in that young soldier something of herself, the same determination and capability and uncertainty about what those qualities would demand. He had chosen isolation after his service, had retreated to the mountains where his skills could fade into memory and legend. But he had also trained her, had passed on everything he knew, had prepared her for a choice he had never had the opportunity to make. She could honor his memory by hiding as he had hidden, or she could honor his training by using it as he had taught her to use it, without hesitation, without apology, without fear. She chose the latter, folding the photograph carefully and placing it back in her duffel. Whatever came next, she would face it the way her grandfather had taught her to face everything, with precision and courage and the understanding that some gifts carried responsibilities that could not be avoided. The next morning, Kira boarded a bus bound for Fort Benning, leaving behind the place where she had transformed from civilian to soldier, from unknown to recognized, from isolated to exceptional. The other passengers were strangers, soldiers heading to their own assignments, their own futures, their own versions of service. She took a seat near the window and watched the base disappear behind them, the training grounds and barracks and ranges becoming smaller with distance until they were just shapes on the horizon. Ahead lay Fort Benning, sniper school, deployment, all the unknowns that separated potential from proven capability. Kira settled into her seat and closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the road beneath the bus, feeling the weight of her grandfather's photograph in her pocket, feeling the future approaching with the inevitability of a target appearing downrange. She was ready, or at least, she would be ready when the moment came. And if her grandfather's training had taught her anything, it was that readiness was not about the absence of fear. It was about the ability to perform despite fear, to find stillness in chaos, to make the difficult shot when everything depended on it. The bus carried her forward into whatever came next, and Kira let the uncertainty wash over her without resistance, knowing that some questions could only be answered through experience, and that her chance to find those answers was finally beginning. Fort Benning was different from the moment Kira stepped off the bus, where basic training had been about breaking down civilians and rebuilding them as soldiers. This place operated with the assumption that everyone who arrived was already a soldier. The question here was not whether you could follow orders or handle physical demands. The question was whether you possessed the specific combination of skills, temperament, and judgment required for specialized operations. The Special Operations Preparation course lasted 8 weeks, and Kira found herself among 32 other candidates, all of them selected from their respective units for exceptional performance. There were infantry soldiers who had distinguished themselves in combat, military police officers with distinguished marksmanship records, combat engineers who had demonstrated unusual aptitude, and one other woman, a staff sergeant named Lydia Kemp, who had spent 6 years as a medic before cross-training to combat arms. The instructors were different too. These were not drill sergeants focused on discipline and uniformity. These were special forces operators, rangers, combat veterans who evaluated candidates with a clinical detachment of people selecting tools for specific jobs. They did not care about making soldiers feel inadequate. They cared about identifying who could operate at the highest levels and who would break under the unique pressures of specialized missions. The first week was pure assessment, physical fitness testing that went beyond standard Army requirements, psychological evaluations designed to identify personality traits and stress responses, academic testing covering mathematics, physics, meteorology, and tactical analysis, and range work that started at 600 meters and extended to distances most soldiers would never attempt. Kira performed well, but she was no longer exceptional by comparison. A sergeant named Marcus Hayes matched her accuracy at long range and exceeded her physical fitness scores. A specialist named Chun, no relation to her former rangemaster, demonstrated superior land navigation skills and completed the obstacle course faster than anyone else. Staff Sergeant Kemp showed remarkable composure under simulated stress and scored highest on the psychological evaluations. For the first time since entering the military, Kira was surrounded by peers who matched or exceeded her capabilities in various domains. It was simultaneously humbling and liberating. She no longer carried the burden of being the anomaly, the outlier who made others uncomfortable. Here, everyone was exceptional in their own way, and the competition drove improvement rather than resentment. The instructors noticed this dynamic and exploited it deliberately. They paired candidates together for training exercises, forcing them to learn from each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. Kira found herself working with Hayes on long-range calculations, with Chun on tactical movement, with Kemp on field medical procedures. Each partnership revealed gaps in her knowledge, areas where her grandfather's training, comprehensive as it had been, had not prepared her for every scenario. Week 3 brought the first major elimination. 6 candidates were removed from the program, not for failure, but for being assessed as better suited to other specializations. The instructors delivered the news without ceremony, simply informing each candidate that their talents would be better utilized elsewhere and providing orders for their next assignment. There were no appeals, no second chances, just the clinical reality that not everyone was meant for this particular path. The remaining 26 candidates trained harder, understanding that elimination could come at any moment, that every exercise was an evaluation, that complacency meant removal. The physical demands increased weekly, the academic requirements became more complex, and the range work extended to scenarios that tested not just marksmanship, but the ability to make rapid decisions under ambiguous conditions. Week 5 introduced stalking exercises, the art of moving through terrain while remaining undetected by observers. This was where Kira's Montana upbringing proved most valuable. She had spent years moving through forests while hunting, learning to read the land and use natural concealment, understanding how to control movement and minimize disturbance. Her grandfather had taught her that good snipers were invisible not because of camouflage, but because they understood how to move like part of the landscape. The exercise area was a 3-square-mile section of forested hills monitored by instructors with high-powered optics. Candidates had to move from a starting point to an objective 600 meters away, stopping twice to take simulated shots without being detected. If an observer spotted you, you failed. If you missed the shots, you failed. If you took too long, You failed. Kira moved through the terrain like water, finding its course, using every fold in the ground, every shadow, every natural feature that could break up her silhouette. She understood that observers looked for movement, for contrast, for anything that seemed out of place. She became a part of the landscape, moving only when wind stirred the vegetation, freezing when the air was still, advancing in increments that seemed too small to notice but accumulated into progress. She reached her first firing position, a slight depression behind a fallen tree, and took her shot through a gap in the foliage. The target was 400 meters distant, a metal plate barely visible through the undergrowth. She fired, confirmed the hit through her scope, and began her movement to the second position. The second leg was more challenging, crossing an open area where concealment was minimal and observers had clear sightlines. Kira waited for cloud cover to reduce shadows, then moved in a low crawl that took 20 minutes to cover 50 meters. Every movement was calculated, every placement of hand and knee deliberate, minimizing the disturbance to grass and earth that might catch an observer's eye. She reached her second firing position as the sun dropped low on the horizon, creating long shadows that complicated observation. The final shot was 600 meters to a target positioned at the edge of a clearing, the most difficult shot of the exercise. She settled into position, confirmed her range, adjusted for the crosswind she felt on her face, and took the shot. Hit! She completed the movement to the objective and verified her time. 4 hours and 12 minutes. Within the allowed window, both shots successful, no detection by observers. She had passed. Over the next 3 days, she watched as other candidates completed the exercise with varying degrees of success. Hayes was detected twice and failed. Chen completed successfully, but took longer than Kira. Kemp succeeded with impressive efficiency, reaching the objective in 3 hours and 40 minutes. Of the 26 candidates, only 16 successfully completed the stalking exercise. The 10 who failed were eliminated that evening, reduced back to their original units with the knowledge that they had been found wanting at the highest levels of assessment. Kira watched them pack their gear, saw the disappointment and frustration in their faces, and understood that excellence was not a guarantee of success. You could be good, could be very good, and still not be good enough for what this particular path demanded. Week 7 brought team exercises where the remaining 16 candidates were divided into 4-person teams and given complex missions requiring coordination and complementary skills. Kira found herself teamed with Hayes, Kemp, and a ranger-qualified sergeant named Davries, who specialized in breaching and close-quarters combat. Their mission was to infiltrate a mock enemy compound, identify a high-value target among multiple decoys, and eliminate the target from concealed positions without alerting security forces. It was the most complex scenario they had faced, requiring surveillance, planning, infiltration, precision shooting, and extraction, all while remaining undetected. DeVries took tactical lead, organizing their approach and timing. Kemp handled medical preparation and backup planning. Hayes and Kira split sniper duties, with Hayes focusing on security elements and Kira designated to take the final shot on the target. They spent 6 hours in planning and reconnaissance, another 4 hours in position, and executed the mission in 40 seconds. Kira's shot was taken at 730 meters through a second-story window, striking a target the size of a human head surrounded by decoys that looked identical until you understood what to look for. She had identified the real target by behavior patterns, by the subtle differences in how security personnel position themselves, by reading a situation that had no obvious answer. The shot was perfect, and the mission was successful, and their instructor, a grizzled Special Forces Master Sergeant named Rodriguez, looked at their team with an expression that might have been approval. "That is what right looks like," he said simply. "That is the standard." Week 8 brought the final assessment, a combination of everything they had learned, compressed into a 72-hour field exercise with minimal sleep, constant pressure, and scenarios designed to push candidates past their breaking points. Kira moved through those 3 days in a state of focused exhaustion, completing tasks with mechanical precision while her body screamed for rest and her mind fought to maintain clarity. When it ended, when the whistle blew and the exercise was declared complete, 12 candidates remained standing, for had been eliminated during the final assessment, unable to maintain performance under the accumulated stress. Kira was among the 12, and, as she stood in formation waiting for the final results, she felt something she had not felt since leaving Montana. She felt like she had earned her place, not because of her grandfather's training, not because of natural talent, but because she had endured the same crucible as everyone else and emerged on the other side. She was no longer the anomaly, the outlier, the person who made others uncomfortable. She was a peer among peers, exceptional but not alone in that exceptionality. Rodriguez stood before the formation, his voice carrying across the exhausted group. "You 12 are approved for sniper school," he said. "You have demonstrated the baseline capabilities required. But understand this. What you accomplished here is the beginning, not the end. Sniper school will be harder. Combat will be harder still. Some of you will succeed. Some will not. The only guarantee is that you will all be tested beyond what you think you can endure." He paused, letting his words settle. "Report to Fort Benning Sniper School in 2 weeks," he said. "Use that time to rest, to prepare, and understand what you are committing to." Dismissed. The formation broke, and Kira felt Kemp's hand on her shoulder. "We made it," Kemp said, and there was relief and pride in her voice. "We made it," Kira echoed, but she knew that making it here was just permission to attempt the next level, that the real test was still ahead, that sniper school would demand even more than this preparation course had required. That night, lying in her bunk, Kira thought about her grandfather and wondered if he had felt this way before his first deployment. This mixture of confidence and uncertainty, readiness and doubt. She touched the photograph in her pocket and made him a silent promise. She would not waste the training he had given her. She would push herself to the absolute limits of her capability. And when the moment came, when she faced the shot that defined everything, she would be ready. Sniper school began with a simple statement from a senior instructor, a chief warrant officer named Garrett, who had 23 years of service and more confirmed combat kills than anyone in the room would ever know. He stood before the 42 students assembled in the classroom and spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority earned through experience. 50% of you will not graduate, he said. This is not speculation. This is statistical reality based on 30 years of running this course. You will fail because the standards are unforgiving, because the margin for error is zero, because being very good is not good enough when a quarter-inch miss means mission failure or friendly casualties. He paused, his eyes moving across the assembled students, most of them men, 3 women including Kira, all of them bearing the confidence of soldiers who had already proven themselves exceptional in some capacity. This course is 10 weeks long, Garrett continued. You will learn advanced marksmanship, range estimation, ballistic calculations, camouflage and concealment, stalking, observation, target detection, and mission planning. You will learn to make shots that most soldiers think are impossible. You will learn to remain hidden in terrain that offers no concealment. You will learn to observe for hours without moving, to gather intelligence without being detected, to operate as a 2-person team where both members must function with absolute precision. Kira sat in the second row, her notebook open, absorbing every word. Around her were the 11 other graduates from the preparation course, plus 30 additional students who had come through different pipelines, proven themselves through different criteria. Hay sat to her left, Kemp 3 rows back, each of them understanding that everything they had accomplished so far was merely the price of admission to this place. The first 2 weeks were academic intensive, learning the mathematics of long-range shooting in exhaustive detail, ballistic coefficients and atmosphere conditions, Coriolis effect and spin drift, the way temperature affected powder burn rates, and how humidity changed air density. Kira's grandfather had taught her practical applications, had given her intuitive understanding, but this was formalization of that knowledge into precise scientific principles. She excelled in the academics, but so did most of the class. These were not typical soldiers. These were people who understood that intellectual rigor was as important as physical capability, that modern sniping required as much time with calculators and weather instruments as it did behind rifles. Week 3 brought them to the range for the first qualification shoots, and this was where the eliminations began in earnest. The standard was brutal. At 600 meters, you had to maintain a 6-inch group across 5 shots. At 800 meters, an 8-inch group. At 1,000 meters, a 10-inch group. Any shot outside those parameters was a failure, and 3 failures meant elimination from the course. Kira watched 5 students wash out in the first week of range qualifications, good shooters who could not maintain consistency under the pressure of knowing that every shot mattered. Hayes struggled initially, his groups expanding under stress, but he adapted and survived. Kim surprised everyone by shooting with mechanical consistency, her medical background giving her steady hands and disciplined breathing control. By week 5, the class had been reduced to 28 students, and the training shifted to field craft and stalking. This was where Kira's preparation showed most clearly. Where other students had to learn how to move through terrain without detection, she already possessed the instincts and understanding that came from years of practice. She could read the ground, could anticipate where observers would focus their attention, could become invisible through patience and understanding rather than just camouflage. The stalking exercises at sniper school were more demanding than anything in the preparation course. Observers were experienced snipers themselves, positioned with powerful optics and communications equipment, tasked with detecting students moving through designated lanes. You had to cover 800 meters, establish a final firing position within 200 meters of the target, take 2 shots without being detected, and extract without compromise. The failure rate was devastating. Students who had shot perfectly on the range could not translate that skill to field conditions. They moved too quickly, created too much disturbance, failed to understand that fieldcraft was as much about psychology as technique. You had to think like the observers, had to anticipate what they would notice, had to exploit the gaps in human attention. Kira completed her first stalk in 5 hours, both shots successful, no detection. Her second stalk took 4 hours. Her third took 3.5. Each iteration refined her understanding, compressed her movements, improved her ability to exploit terrain and weather. By week 7, the instructors were using her final firing positions as teaching examples, showing other students how proper concealment looked, how minimal the disturbance should be. But success brought its own complications. The other students noticed her consistency, saw that she rarely struggled where they fought for every small victory. Some responded with respect, studying her techniques and asking questions. Others responded with resentment, suggesting she had some unfair advantage, some prior training that violated the spirit of the course. Hayes confronted her about it during week 8, his voice frustrated but not hostile. People are saying you already went through sniper school somewhere else, he said, that you're some kind of plant or test case. You need to address that before it becomes a bigger problem. I never attended sniper school before, Kira said truthfully. Everything I know comes from training with my grandfather. Hayes studied her for a moment. Your grandfather must have been one hell of a teacher, he said. He was, Kira replied quietly. The final phase of the course was the culmination exercise, a 5-day field problem where students worked in 2-person teams to complete realistic missions under observation. Kira was partnered with a veteran sergeant named Okoye who had served 2 combat deployments and possessed the calm professionalism of someone who understood what this training was preparing them for. Their mission parameters were straightforward but demanding. Infiltrate an area, conduct surveillance on a target building, identify and eliminate a high-value target, and extract without detection. They would be graded on every aspect of performance, from planning to execution to post-mission analysis. They spent 16 hours in planning, developing primary and alternate routes, identifying firing positions, calculating shot data from multiple distances and angles, preparing for contingencies. Okoye handled tactical planning and security, while Kira focused on marksmanship preparation and target analysis. The infiltration took 6 hours, moving through heavily observed terrain and darkness, every movement calculated to avoid detection. They established their observation post 300 meters from the target building, concealed in dense vegetation on elevated ground that gave them clear sight lines while remaining invisible to security patrols. For 30 hours, they observed, watching patterns, compting personnel, identifying vehicles and equipment, building a complete intelligence picture of the target area. They rotated observation duties, one sleeping while the other watched, maintaining continuous surveillance without break. Kira saw him first, the designated target, identifiable by specific behavior patterns and clothing details that distinguish him from decoys and support personnel. He appeared in a second-story window at irregular intervals, never following predictable patterns, always surrounded by other people who could serve as human shields if the shooter was not precise. She tracked his movements for 12 hours, learning his patterns, understanding his routine, identifying the moment when he would be most vulnerable. The window of opportunity would be narrow, perhaps 5 seconds, requiring immediate recognition and execution without hesitation. The moment came during the second evening, as the sun dropped low and cast long shadows across the compound. The target appeared in the window, alone for the first time, visible from shoulders to head, range confirmed at 640 meters, wind 3/4 value from the left at 8 miles per hour. Kira had already calculated the shot, had already adjusted her scope, had already controlled her breathing, and found the stillness that preceded perfect execution. She placed the crosshairs precisely where they needed to be, compensated for every variable that stood between intention and outcome, and pressed the trigger with the kind of inevitability that came from absolute certainty. The shot was perfect. The target went down, marked by the simulation round that confirmed the kill. Before anyone in the compound could react, Kira and Okoye were moving, extracting from their position using a route they had prepared during the initial infiltration, covering ground with speed that came from planning and practice. They reached the extraction point 14 minutes later, within the window that defined successful exfiltration. The evaluators confirmed their performance, verified their shot data, reviewed their surveillance logs and planning documents. Chief Warrant Officer Garrett himself conducted their debrief, his expression revealing nothing as he reviewed their work. When he finished, he looked at both of them directly. "That was flawless," he said simply. "Planning, execution, extraction, all performed at the highest standard. This is what graduating from sniper school looks like." Kira felt something release inside her, a tension she had been carrying since the first day of basic training, since the moment she had decided to stop hiding what she could do. She had proven it now, not just to others but to herself. She belonged here. She had earned this. Week 10 brought graduation, and 21 students stood in formation out of the 42 who had started. Hayes had made it, shooting his way through struggles and setbacks. Kemp had made it, her consistency and composure carrying her through. Okoye had made it, adding the sniper qualification to his already distinguished record. And Kira stood among them, 19 years old now, no longer the uncertain recruit who had arrived at Fort Bennington 6 months earlier. She was a qualified Army sniper, trained to the highest standards, prepared for deployment, ready to put her skills to use in service of missions that would define the rest of her career. Garrett stood before the formation one final time, his voice carrying the weight of experience and expectation. "You are now part of a community that extends across generations," he said. "Snipers who served in every conflict since this nation has existed. You carry their legacy. You will add to it through your own service. Some of you will see combat. All of you will face moments that test everything you learned here." He paused, and Kira saw something in his expression that looked like pride mixed with concern. "Remember that the rifle is a tool," he said. "You are the weapon. Your judgment, discipline, your ability to make the right decision under impossible pressure. That is what determines success or failure. Anyone can learn to shoot. Not everyone can learn to shoot wisely." The formation was dismissed, and as Kira walked away from the ceremony, she felt the weight of what came next settling over her shoulders. Training was complete. Preparation was finished. Now came the real test, the one that could not be simulated or controlled, the one where mistakes carried consequences that could not be undone. She was ready, or as ready as anyone could be for what the future held. Deployment orders came 3 weeks after graduation. Kira was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached as a sniper team member supporting a platoon conducting operations in a region where insurgent activity had increased dramatically over the previous months. The area was mountainous, with villages scattered across valleys and ridgelines, terrain that favored defenders who knew the land and could move through it without detection. She arrived at the forward operating base on a transport helicopter that touched down in a cloud of dust and departed within minutes, unwilling to remain stationary long enough to become a target. The base was a collection of hardened structures and temporary buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and guard towers, a small island of American military presence in a landscape that belonged to people who had been fighting in these mountains for generations. Her platoon sergeant, a combat veteran named First Sergeant Dalton, greeted her with professional courtesy but visible skepticism. He was in his mid-30s, weathered by multiple deployments, carrying himself with the confident wariness of someone who had seen too many new arrivals fail to adapt to combat conditions. "You're 19 years old," he said, reviewing her file in his office. "You graduated sniper school 3 weeks ago. You have 0 combat experience. And they're sending you here to support Rangers who have been doing this for years." It was not a question, but Kira answered anyway. "Yes, First Sergeant." Dalton looked at her directly. "I do not care what you did in training," he said. "I do not care about your scores, or your reputation, or who your grandfather was. Out here, none of that matters. What matters is whether you can perform when people are shooting back, when the conditions are not controlled, when failure means soldiers die." "I understand," Kira said. "I hope you do," Dalton replied, "because I have a mission in 2 days that requires sniper support, and you're the asset I have been given. Your spotter will be Sergeant Luis Ochoa. He has 3 deployments and more time in combat than you have in the Army. Listen to him, trust his judgment, and do not try to prove anything. Just do your job." She met Ochoa that afternoon, a compact man with steady eyes and an economy of movement that spoke to years of experience. He was 28 years old and had been a sniper for 4 years, with confirmed kills in multiple theaters. He studied Kira with the same skepticism Dalton had shown, but there was also curiosity beneath it. "I read your file," he said as they prepared their equipment. "Top of your class at sniper school. Perfect scores on most evaluations. Instructors saying you are one of the best students they have seen in years." Kira said nothing, knowing that words meant nothing here, that only performance would determine whether Ochoa would trust her. "That is impressive on paper," Ochoa continued. "But this is not paper. This is real. People here want to kill us. They are good at it. They know this terrain better than we ever will. And they do not care about your training scores. I am here to do whatever the mission requires," Kira said. Ochoa nodded slowly. "Good answer," he said. "Let us see if you can back it up." The mission briefing came the next evening. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, an insurgent commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces, believed to be operating from a compound in a village 15 kilometers from the base. The Rangers would conduct a raid to capture or kill the target. Kira and Ochoa would provide overwatch from elevated positions, securing the approach routes and providing precision fire support if needed. They studied the terrain models and satellite imagery, identifying firing positions that offered clear sight lines to the village while providing concealment and multiple exfiltration routes. The village sat in a valley, surrounded by ridgelines, natural fortress terrain that had been fought over for centuries. Their position would be on the northern ridge, 800 meters from the compound, elevated enough to see over most structures but exposed to counter fire if they were detected. They inserted by helicopter 4 hours before dawn, moving through darkness to reach their position before the sun revealed their movement. The climb was steep, the terrain loose and treacherous, every step calculated to avoid creating noise or disturbance that might alert sentries. Kira moved with Ochoa, matching his pace, following his lead, understanding that his experience in this environment was more valuable than anything she had learned in training. They reached their position 90 minutes before sunrise, establishing concealment in a cluster of rocks that offered protection and a clear view of the valley below. Ochoa set up the spotting scope while Kira positioned her rifle, a precision weapon configured for long-range work, equipped with suppressor and night vision capability. The village began to wake as the sun cleared the eastern ridgeline, casting long shadows across narrow streets and mud brick structures. Kira watched through her scope, observing patterns of movement, identifying armed personnel, tracking vehicles that moved through the area. Ochoa maintained communications with the Ranger element, updating them on conditions and potential threats. The raid began at 0600. Rangers moving through the southern approach with coordinated precision, clearing structures systematically as they advanced toward the target compound. Kira watched the operation unfold, her rifle tracking potential threats, her finger resting outside the trigger guard, waiting for Ochoa's direction. Contact came from an unexpected direction. Armed fighters emerging from a building the Rangers had already cleared, positioning themselves to ambush the assault element from behind. Ochoa saw them first, identifying 3 individuals with weapons moving into position behind a low wall. 3 military-age males, weapons visible 200 meters south of friendly position, he said, his voice calm and professional. They have clear shot on our guys. You have a call. Kira acquired the first target through her scope, a man raising an AK pattern rifle toward the Ranger element, his intention unmistakable. The range was 740 meters, wind negligible, angle requiring slight elevation adjustment. She had perhaps 2 seconds before he fired on American soldiers. She made the shot without hesitation, without thought, the action flowing from observation to execution with the kind of inevitability that came from thousands of hours of practice. The target dropped. She transitioned to the second target, adjusted, fired. He dropped. The third target began to move, recognizing danger, but Kira had already acquired him, already calculated his movement, already pressed the trigger. 3 shots, 3 seconds, 3 threats eliminated. Good hits, Ochoa said quietly. Rangers are clear. They did not even know they were in danger. The raid continued, the Rangers securing the compound and extracting the high-value target without further contact. Kira and Ochoa maintained their position for another 2 hours, providing security while the ground element completed their mission and began their exfiltration. Only when the Rangers were clear did they collapse their position and begin their own withdrawal, moving down the ridgeline toward the extraction point. Back at the base, Dalton found Kira as she was cleaning her rifle in the armory. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ochoa briefed me, he said. 3 targets, 3 hits, 700+ meters. Under time pressure with friendly forces in danger. He said it was the most clinical shooting he has seen in combat. Kira continued cleaning her rifle, not sure how to respond. I was wrong about you, Dalton continued. I thought you would freeze or hesitate or fail to adapt. I thought training could not prepare someone your age for what happens when it is real. But Ochoa says you did not hesitate at all. Says you performed like you have been doing this for years. My grandfather taught me well, Kira said quietly. Dalton nodded. He must have, because what you did today saved American lives. Those Rangers had no idea they were about to be hit from behind. Your shots gave them time to react, to reposition, to complete the mission without casualties. He paused, and something in his expression softened slightly. I'm glad you were here, he said, and I'm sorry I doubted you. You had every reason to doubt, Kira replied. I was improving. Not anymore, Dalton said. Now you're proven, and that changes everything. Over the following weeks, Kira and Ochoa conducted 6 more missions, each one building on the last, each one refining their partnership into something that functioned with minimal communication and maximum efficiency. Ochoa stopped treating her like a novice and started treating her like a peer, trusting her judgment, valuing her input, recognizing that age and experience were not the same as capability. The Rangers who had been skeptical began to request her specifically for operations, knowing that having her in Overwatch meant they could focus on their objectives without worrying about threats they could not see. She became known in the battalion, not as the young female sniper who defied expectations, but simply as someone you wanted on your team when a mission mattered. But with that recognition came pressure of a different kind. Word reached higher command about her performance, about the consistency of her shooting under combat conditions, about her ability to make difficult decisions without hesitation. Officers began to pay attention. Plans were made, and Kira understood that her path was about to change again, that success in one arena simply opened doors to more demanding challenges. She thought about Garrett's words from graduation, about how the rifle was just a tool and the person behind it was the real weapon. She thought about her grandfather and what he had faced in his own combat experience, the weight of knowing that your actions directly determined whether other people lived or died. She had proven she could shoot in combat. She had proven she could perform under pressure. But the question that remained, the one that kept her awake some nights, was whether she could sustain that performance indefinitely, whether the psychological weight of taking lives, even enemy lives, even lives that threatened her fellow soldiers, would eventually extract a cost that training had not prepared her to pay. She did not have answers yet, but she understood that those answers would come whether she was ready for them or not. That combat had a way of revealing truths about yourself that could not be learned any other way. For now, she focused on the mission, on the work, on being the asset her unit needed her to be. Everything else would have to wait. The mission that would define everything came 3 months into her deployment. Intelligence had identified a meeting between multiple high-value targets, insurgent leaders gathering in a remote compound to coordinate operations across the entire region. The meeting represented a rare opportunity, a chance to eliminate leadership that had been responsible for dozens of attacks and numerous coalition casualties. But the compound was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile villages and defensive positions, accessible only through valleys that could be easily defended and monitored. A ground assault would be detected long before it reached the objective. Airstrikes risked collateral damage and could not guarantee eliminating targets who might scatter at the first sign of attack. The only viable option was a precision strike from extreme range, a shot that would have to be taken from a position so distant that detection would be difficult and counterattack nearly impossible. The briefing was attended by battalion command, including Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who commanded the Ranger Battalion, and representatives from Special Operations Command who had been tracking these targets for months. Kira sat beside Ochoa, both of them understanding before anyone spoke that this mission would fall to them. Harrison stood at the front of the briefing room, his expression grave. The compound is in a valley 1,200 meters from the nearest concealed position we can access, he said, gesturing to satellite imagery displayed on the screen. That is beyond the effective range of standard sniper rifles. That is a shot that requires specialized equipment, perfect conditions, and exceptional skill. He paused, looking directly at Kira. Specialist Thorne, your performance over the past 3 months has been remarkable. You have not missed a shot in combat. You have demonstrated judgment and composure that exceed your age and experience. This mission requires someone who can make an impossible shot under conditions where failure is not an option. Are you capable of this? Kira felt every eye in the room turned toward her. She thought about her grandfather, about the stories of shots he had made in Vietnam at distances people claimed were impossible. She thought about the thousands of hours of training, the endless repetition, the gradual compression of skill into instinct. She thought about the weight of what was being asked, the lives that depended on success, the consequences of failure. I can make the shot, she said quietly, but I need to see the terrain and understand conditions. That night, she and Ochoa studied every piece of intelligence available, every satellite image, every weather report, every detail that might affect a shot at 1,200 meters. That distance was at the absolute edge of what was possible with the weapons they had available. Wind would be a critical factor. Temperature and humidity would affect ballistics. The angle from their elevated position would require precise compensation. And they would have one chance, perhaps one shot, before the targets scattered or responded with overwhelming force. They inserted 3 days before the scheduled meeting, moving through enemy territory with a small Ranger security element that would establish a defensive perimeter while Kira and Ochoa moved into their final position. The movement took 2 days of careful navigation through terrain that offered limited concealment and constant danger of detection. They moved only at night, hiding during daylight hours, covering perhaps 4 kilometers in each movement, approaching the objective with the patience of people who understood that speed was less important than remaining undetected. They reached their position 36 hours before the meeting, a rocky outcrop on a ridgeline that offered clear line of sight to the compound while being far enough away that their presence was unlikely to be noticed. Ochoa established the spotting position while Kira prepared her rifle, a specialized weapon configured specifically for extreme long-range work, equipped with ammunition selected for optimal performance at extended distances. They settled in and began to wait, taking turns observing and resting, gathering atmospheric data, tracking wind patterns, building the complete environmental picture they would need when the moment came. Kira measured temperature every hour, recorded humidity changes, observed how thermal currents moved through the valley, noted how wind patterns shifted as the sun moved across the sky. The meeting was scheduled to begin at 1400 hours on the 3rd day. At 1300, vehicles began arriving at the compound, armed security spreading out to establish a perimeter, the high-value targets moving inside, where they would be invisible to observation. Kira watched through her scope, tracking movements, identifying individuals by the way security personnel position themselves, by the deference shown to certain arrivals. At 1345, the primary target emerged onto a second-story balcony, a man whose face matched intelligence photographs, whose presence confirmed that the meeting was happening as predicted. He stood in clear view for perhaps 20 seconds, then moved back inside. Kira settled into her final firing position, her body molded to the terrain, the rifle supported and stable. Ochoa lay beside her with a spotting scope, gathering last-minute data on wind and distance. The range was precisely 1,216 meters, the longest shot Kira had ever attempted outside of training. The wind was variable, gusting between 6 and 9 miles per hour, coming from her 10 o'clock position. The temperature was 32 degrees Celsius, the humidity 40%, all factors that would affect how the bullet traveled. Ochoa fed her the calculations, the adjustments needed to compensate for every variable, the exact point where she needed to hold to account for wind drift and bullet drop, and the simple fact that at this distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 2 seconds, enough time for a target to move, for conditions to change, for 1,000 small factors to turn a perfect shot into a miss. At 1412, the target emerged again, this time standing at the balcony rail, conversing with someone inside. Kira acquired him in her scope, placed the crosshairs according to her calculations, found her breathing rhythm, felt her heartbeat slow to that deep, steady pace that preceded every successful shot. Wind is steady at 7 miles per hour, Ochoa said quietly. Target is stationary. You have a shot when ready. Kira exhaled slowly, found that moment of absolute stillness that existed between breaths, between heartbeats, between intention and action. She pressed the trigger with the kind of certainty that came from knowing she had done everything possible to account for every variable, that the shot was as perfect as human capability could make it. The rifle recoiled, the suppressor reducing but not eliminating the report. Through her scope, Kira watched the bullet's flight, watched the target for nearly 2 full seconds as the round traveled across impossible distance through shifting wind and thermal currents. The target dropped, struck center mass, eliminated instantly. 1,216 meters. One shot. Mission success. Hit confirmed, Ochoa said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. That was impossible. That was the best shot I have ever seen. They collapsed their position immediately, moving away from the ridgeline as the compound below erupted in activity. Security forces searching for a threat they could not see, could not locate, could not respond to. The Rangers' security element covered their withdrawal, and they moved through enemy territory with the same patient discipline that had brought them to the position, reaching the extraction point 14 hours later without compromise. Back at the base, the debrief was attended by officers Kira had never seen before, people whose ranks and insignia indicated they had come specifically to understand what had happened, to verify that a 19-year-old specialist had made a shot that defied standard operating assumptions about what was possible in combat. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stood before her, and for the first time since she had arrived at the battalion, she saw something in his expression that looked like genuine respect, bordering on disbelief. "That shot will be studied," he said. "It will be analyzed and discussed, and used as a case study for what is achievable under perfect execution. You have proven something today that most people thought was impossible. You have changed what people think is possible." He paused, then continued, "I am recommending you for recognition. I am also recommending that you be assigned to specialized units where your capabilities can be utilized at the highest levels. You have earned that opportunity." The recognition came in the form of a bronze star with Valor device, presented at a ceremony attended by the entire battalion. But more significantly, it came in the form of respect from soldiers who had seen what she could do, who understood that excellence was not about age or gender or background, but about the willingness to perform when everything was on the line. Before we close, if you enjoyed this story and found yourself moved by Kira's journey from underestimated recruit to legendary sniper, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character. Maybe you have witnessed similar courage in real life, or perhaps you know someone who showed hidden strength when it mattered most. Share your thoughts below. In the quiet moments after the ceremony, Kira found herself alone with the photograph of her grandfather, the image of a young soldier who had walked this same path decades before. She understood now what he had tried to teach her, why he had spent years training her, why he had prepared her for choices he had never fully explained. He had given her the skills to be exceptional, but more importantly, he had given her the wisdom to use those skills with judgment and purpose. He had taught her that excellence without wisdom was dangerous, that capability without restraint was destructive, that being able to take a life meant understanding the weight of that decision. She had made the impossible shot. She had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt. But the real test, the one that would define the rest of her career and her life, was not whether she could perform under pressure. It was whether she could carry the weight of what she had done, of what she would continue to do, without losing the humanity that made those actions meaningful. At 18, she had taken her first steps into a world most people would never understand. At 19, she had become a legend, the sniper who made impossible shots look routine, who defied expectations and redefined standards. But she was still Kira Thorne, granddaughter of Thomas Thorne, carrier of a legacy that extended across generations, a soldier who understood that every shot carried consequences, every mission demanded judgment, every success came with responsibility. She folded the photograph carefully and placed it back in her pocket, over her heart, where it had rested through every mission, every challenge, every moment of doubt and triumph. Her grandfather had trained her for this, had prepared her for this, had believed she could handle this. She would prove him right, not just through the shots she made, but through the wisdom she brought to making them. Not just through her capabilities, but through her understanding of when to use them and when to hold back. The legend had been born, but the person behind the legend, the young woman who carried the weight of extraordinary skill and the responsibility that came with it, she was just beginning to understand what her life would demand. And she was ready to meet it, one impossible shot at a time.